Doncs anem per començar, no? Bona tarda a tothom i molt benvinguts. Gràcies per ser aquí. Hi ha una bona majoria, estem molt contentes. Avui tenim la gran sort de compartir una experiència molt bonica, molt inspiradora, que ens ve de Mississipí. Es diu Cooperation Jackson i comptem amb la presència de Akuno, membre fundador d'aquesta experiència cooperativista, al qual li hem d'agrair la seva presència aquí. It's a pleasure for us to having you here. Thanks. Bé, aquest acte l'organitzem la Comunalitat de Vic amb la col·laboració de l'Ateneu Cooperatiu de la Catalunya Central i és el primer acte que en Akuno farà en territori català, va arribar ahir i avui ja l'hem portat a conèixer moltes experiències a Vic i l'hem passejat per tot arreu. Llavors demà seguirà aquest cicle, serà a Ripoll i tota la setmana estarà passejant pel territori i serà aquest cicle que acabarà a Barcelona el diumenge a la Fira de Llibres, la Literal. I bé, això. I em sembla que, no sé si tots vosaltres coneixeu el projecte de Comunalitat de Vic, us en faré 5 cèntims, intentaré ser breu, però a vegades sempre ens allarguem amb això. Som un projecte que és força jove, va començar l'any passat i surt d'una iniciativa d'una línia de subvencions de la Generalitat de Catalunya, del Departament d'Empresa i Treball, i són 22 comunalitats urbanes que estem treballant arreu del territori català en contextos urbans amb la voluntat de dinamitzar l'economia local des de la perspectiva del dret a la ciutat i l'economia social solidària. Com a economia local no només entenem aquell intercanvi monetari que es fa mercantil, sinó que també comprenem totes aquelles economies comunitàries que es realitzen també a través de projectes d'ajuda mútua entre les persones. I aquí neix un dels grans objectius de la Comunalitat de Vic, que és crear i enfortir projectes d'ajuda mútua de la mà del teixit organitzat, com són les associacions de veïns, el teixit cooperatiu, les economies socials solidàries, projectes autoorganitzats, etc., amb la voluntat d'enfortir el teixit social, recuperar o tenir molt present els béns comuns i poder resoldre necessitats de les persones a través de la seva autoorganització i governança democràtica, tenir molt presents criteris d'inclusivitat, accessibilitat i sostenibilitat. No sé si deixo alguna cosa, però passo la paraula a la meva companya.
Hola, bé, per aterrar una mica en la Comunalitat de Vic us faré 5 cèntims de les línies de treball que ens guien en el projecte. Primer dir que la Comunalitat de Vic està impulsada per 3 entitats socials, que són l'Associació Tapís, l'Associació de Veïns i Veïnes del Barri del Remei i la Fera Ferotge. I tenim 6 línies de treball, que una és la transició ecosocial, que ens permet fomentar xarxes autoorganitzades per generar canvis en un model de producció, distribució i consum d'aquells productes, béns i serveis, en la qual destaquem 3 activitats que hem generat en aquesta primera anualitat, que són fires d'economia circular. Hem fet diverses fires d'economia circular, mercats d'intercanvi i hem acompanyat a la creació d'una cooperativa energètica, una comunitat energètica que ja s'ha constituït com a cooperativa, que s'anomena Vic Coop, a nivell de Ciutat de Vic. En l'eix de ciutat habitable volem recuperar la memòria dels moviments veïnals i treballar per enfortir el teixit associatiu, així com fer créixer les relacions i la vida als carrers i a les places a través d'una xarxa d'entitats juvenils, un documental que estem creant com a memorial d'una cooperativa d'habitatges que es va crear aquí al barri als anys 60, dels pisos Joan 23, i una cartografia dels barris del Remei i de l'Estadi. Seguint en les línies de treball, tenim l'eix d'economia de les cures, en el que volem posar en valor les tasques reproductives i de cures com a part indispensable de l'economia, i ho hem fet a través de la creació d'una xarxa de cuidadores, de persones cuidadores professionals, amb l'acompanyament de les professionals del Cap del Remei. I per últim, un dels eixos que hem estat impulsant aquesta primera anualitat és la del comerç local i economia social i solidària, que vol impulsar el petit comerç dels barris a través de les xarxes d'ajuda mútua entre comerciants, consumidors, distribuïdors i productors, i acostar aquests comerços als models basats en l'economia social i solidària. Això ho hem fet a través d'un projecte que es diu l'Escola es cuina al barri, que hem fet conjuntament amb l'ACVIC, el Centre d'Arts Contemporanis de la ciutat, i també estem promovent un grup de consum al barri de la Serra de Sant Ferm. I per últim, les dues línies de treball que no hem pogut treballar tant en la primera anualitat, però sí que estem començant a impulsar, són sobirania tecnològica i drets digitals i cultura, que volem, a través de sobirania tecnològica i drets digitals, impulsar projectes tecnològics amb una perspectiva crítica basada en els drets humans i que fomentin l'accés a internet i a les tecnologies de forma democràtica i universal. I en l'eix de cultura, posar en valor les arts com a una expressió indispensable de la societat que com a llenguatge universal contribueixen en la cohesió social, així com potenciar col·lectius artístics organitzats amb una perspectiva social, fent-los presents i donant-los visibilitat.
Bueno, gràcies. Després d'explicar-vos una mica la comunalitat, el projecte de les comunalitats urbanes i específicament la Comunalitat Urbana de Vic, si voleu més informació, treballem a l'espai veïnal del Pont, que és aquí al costat, és l'espai de l'Associació de Veïns i Veïnes del barri del Remei, i tenim una oficina allà. Vull dir que si algú té especial interès en conèixer algun projecte en concret, ens podeu trobar a les 3 tècniques allà. Us introdueixo una mica com funcionarà l'acte. La idea és que hi hagi un espai de conversa que duri més o menys uns 3/4 d'hora i que després es puguin generar preguntes amb el públic. Per tant, deixarem més o menys uns 20 minuts perquè pugueu intervenir també i es creï un espai de conversa no només entre les persones que són aquí a la tarima, sinó entre totes les que som aquí. Què més? Us presento els ponents i comencem. Això volia dir, sí, tenim a la Natàlia que ens està acompanyant, que farà la traducció consecutiva. Sí. Això vol dir que parlarà en cali, llavors ella traduirà, serà consecutiva, per tant pot ser que s'allargui una mica el temps de debat a conseqüència de la traducció consecutiva. Doncs amb nosaltres, a part de la Natàlia, que és la traductora, tenim a la Laia Hernández, que és psicòloga social i cofundadora de la Fera Ferotge i que ha participat durant anys en moviments socials de base en la recerca de la radicalitat democràtica. La Fera Ferotge, com sabeu, és una de les entitats impulsores de la Comunalitat. I després tenim a Akuno, que és cofundador de Cooperation Jackson, fou director de projectes especials i finançament extern de l'Ajuntament de Jackson durant l'alcaldia de Chokwe Lumumba, ajudant en el desenvolupament cooperatiu, la introducció de mètodes ecològics i la promoció dels drets humans i les relacions internacionals a la ciutat. I ha estat també codirector de la xarxa de drets humans dels Estats Units, director executiu del Fons d'Ajuda als Pobles pels Huracans i fundador de l'Escola de Justícia Social i Desenvolupament Comunitari d'Oakland, Califòrnia. Recentment, a més, fa pocs dies, crec, ha estat guardonat amb el Premi Gandhi per la Pau 2023. Així que, sense més dilacions, passo el micro a la Laia i comencem.
Gràcies. Bé, doncs la primera pregunta que volíem fer, és així molt introductori, és què és Cooperation Jackson?
Good evening, first and foremost. Thank you all for coming. So let me start with where Cooperation Jackson is. We are in a town, is what I would really call it, called Jackson, Mississippi. It is the capital of the state of Mississippi. Mississippi is large in landmass, like it's bigger than Belgium. It's probably almost as big as Belgium and the Netherlands combined, but it only has 2.5 million people. So there are not a lot of people there. It is mainly an agricultural state, mainly a rural state. And the state itself, according to government statistics, is roughly 40% black, 55% white, and then 5% other. And the 5% other includes indigenous people, mainly Choctaw, who are the original inhabitants of most of the state of Mississippi, what is now the state of Mississippi. But there are also a number of immigrants, mainly professionals, who have been brought in to do very particular professional and service tasks. So primarily, number one is doctors and nurses, but there's also engineers in a number of different fields, mainly like chemical engineers for some of the plants, particularly some of the large pig and chicken. The largest city to our south is New Orleans, which is 3 hours away. Then the next largest city to our north is Memphis, Tennessee, which is really an extension of Mississippi in truth, but they claim it's in another state. And then if you keep going up north, it takes you all the way to, this connection takes you all the way to Chicago. And then to our east is the big metropolis of Atlanta, and then there's a freeway and train connection that would take you from Atlanta to Birmingham to Tuscaloosa to Jackson. So there's a trade route. And our city is 80% black, roughly 10% white, and then kind of like 5% other. It's more than 80% black. It's almost 85% black. It is, by U.S. standards, very poor. Over 60% of the people in the city live either at or below the official poverty line. The official unemployment rate in the city is 10%. The unofficial and the real unemployment rate is probably close to 50%. So there's a profound underemployment or unemployment in our city, which is mainly black. Again, which you would imagine the city being as black as it is. And Cooperation Jackson is a project. Okay.
Maybe no.
Okay. I was waiting for you to stop.
I was like, where? Bueno, sí, no? Sent bé. Sí? Sí, vale. Estava explicant on està la Cooperation Jackson i bueno, doncs està al Mississippi. La Jackson és una ciutat que està com molt al centre i estava descrivent també doncs, una mica la geografia doncs, que queda realment al mig, no? O sigui que també per medis de transport doncs, queda molt al mig del que seria l'estat de Mississippi, que ens explica que seria tan gran que la podríem posar com si poséssim Bèlgica i Holanda, seria així de gran. Llavors, tot i que és tan gran, només hi viuen 2,5 milions de persones, és un estat molt agricultural. Llavors, pel que fa a la població, el 40% de la població és negra, el 10% són persones, en la seva majoria de procedència, bueno, o sigui, les poblacions originals del que és doncs, Nord-Amèrica i la Tortuga, les Choctaw, i llavors en un 40% la població blanca. També hi ha en aquest 10% persones immigrants que són les que fan doncs, tasques a vegades especialitzades com per la part d'enginyeria, per tot el tema de l'agricultura i llavors també doncs, a vegades metges, infermeres. Què més? Vale. I llavors pel que fa la ciutat de Jackson, allà doncs, són 85% persones negres, 10% blanques i un 5% doncs, una mica el que s'explicava abans, no? Com altres que podria ser doncs, persones nativoamericanes originals o d'immigració. Llavors hi ha molta pobresa en aquesta ciutat. El 60% estaria a la línia de la pobresa. Llavors les xifres de... Ara em surt en castellà, s'empleo, ho sento. Sí, atur, ho sento. Bueno, arribarien fins al 50%, tot i que oficialment posa que estigui al 10%. I bueno, en la seva majoria doncs, serien persones negres que estan en situació d'atur. I bueno, això seria una mica per explicar el context d'on està la Cooperation Jackson. I ara, què és Cooperation Jackson?
So Cooperation Jackson is an instrument of a strategy that was developed over like a 20-year period, actually. And we call this strategy, this plan, the Jackson-Cush Plan. And we occupy one particular component of that plan, which is to build a social and solidarity economy, and to build it as a means of transforming the overall economy in our community, right, to push it towards really like an eco-socialist orientation. And the two primary means that we use to kind of transform the economy, number one, which is kind of our bedrock foundation, we are acquiring as much land in our community as we can. We buy it, primarily from the private market, and some of it we buy from the actual state of Mississippi, and we put it in what's called a community land trust. That is the basic way in the United States that you can create common property, right, like communal property. So our objective is to take as much land in our community off of the speculative market so that it can't be sold and it can't be privatized, and therefore the working class, primarily black people, cannot be gentrified or pushed out of the community. So that's a foundation component. And then on that, we are then able to build and to inhabit buildings like this one to be able to do various productive enterprises. And for us, that's building worker cooperatives. Right? We have some non-worker cooperatives, but mainly worker cooperatives. And the ones that are kind of our flagship cooperatives, we have an urban farming cooperative called Freedom Farms. We have a catering cooperative. We have a cafe. We have a small manufacturing cooperative called the Community Production Cooperative, and it makes everything from masks for COVID to T-shirts, pants, and toys, a lot of toys, to other things that people might want. It uses primarily 3D printing and digital fabrication to like make furniture and to make things of that nature. So it's a broad range of things that it actually produces. And then there's then we have a recycling co-op. And the other projects that we have been working to build is a grocery co-op. And that one is my biggest headache right now, because that one requires a level of expertise in management, really, that none of our current members have. We've tried, and we'd have to hire like 5 people to do what technically one person should be doing in most of those occupations. So it's something that we're working towards developing. But we have the space. We have over 50 lots, right? We have, so some of the pictures I can show you. These are houses that we have, and what you see in these pictures, our city has a major water crisis. That's one of the houses in our housing co-op, the green one.
Explicava què és Cooperativa Jackson i la descriu com un instrument, una estratègia planejada en un període de 20 anys, des del programa Jackson Coach, que seria, bé, doncs això, no? Algo bastant pensat des de fa temps. Llavors el que fan és agafar doncs, terres i, bueno, perdó. En aquesta estratègia l'objectiu final seria arribar doncs, a que aquestes siguin per la classe treballadora des d'una perspectiva ecosocialista, una orientació ecosocialista, amb una economia transformadora, social i solidària. Ara mateix la manera que ho hem de fer doncs, és comprar terres que estan en el mercat privat, a vegades de l'Estat, i una vegada doncs, aquestes terres ja són part de la Corporation Jackson, la idea és que la classe treballadora ja podrà, doncs, no podrà ser empenyada cap a fora, gentrificada, perquè la podran fer servir doncs, per al projecte que tenen. Llavors, a partir de l'obtenció de la terra, el que es fa doncs, és posar-la a l'ús per cooperatives productives, com les que anirà mostrant aquí que existeixen a la Corporation Jackson. Una de les coses les més conegudes són com la Freedom Farms, que són com uns col·lectius de producció agrícola, i no només agrícola segurament. També catering, un cafè. Llavors també hi ha una part de manufactura que fan de tot, fan des de màscares del Covid, a joguines, tenen una impressora 3D, digital, una cooperativa de reciclatge, fan moltes coses. Llavors, la que ara mateix els està donant més mal de cap és la cooperativa de vegetals. El que passa és que és bastant difícil de manejar, potser, crec que es refereix a la logística, em dóna sensació, i que diu que ara mateix hi ha problemes que potser una persona els hauria de fer i no 5. Llavors ara mateix és una de les coses que s'està portant més mal de cap, però en fi, el tema és que el projecte està, hi ha 50 terrenys que s'han de posar a produir i portar endavant aquesta cooperativa agrícola. I ara ens estava comentant les fotos.
So just briefly, this is part of the solidarity aspect, just the blatant solidarity and mutual aid component of our work, to show you a more complete picture. So what you see here, our city is going through a major water crisis. It's been a water crisis for decades, actually, but now it's at an acute phase where if you came to Jackson, I would advise everyone here to not drink the water. And if you had any kind of open sore on your skin, to not bathe with the water, right? Because it's contaminated, it's that contaminated. And the reason why it's contaminated is because of systemic racism. We are not being provided the resources from the state government to repair the system, just point blank. And so what you see us doing, we had a major water crisis, like the system totally collapsed the end of August and the beginning of September, and the city was without water. The entire city was without adequate water for a month. So we have launched what's called a water sovereignty project. And we're starting, this is phase 1, and all of our communal land property, we're building water catchment systems that are open to the community to use, like in times of crisis. And this is the replacement from an earlier phase of dealing with the water crisis, where we were just giving away thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of bottles of water, which is now just leaving mountains and mountains of plastic in town. So creating another problem by trying to solve one problem. So it's taking us this long, like this is just literally like 2 weeks ago, there's pictures, because we, unfortunately, are dependent upon global supply chains for those big tanks. So we ordered them like 3 months ago, and they just now got here. So we're going to try to do this throughout the entire community, but we're getting a lot of pushback from the state of Mississippi around trying to build something that's autonomous of it and breaking the dependency that we have upon it. But I wanted to highlight this because I think it points to the deeper political aspects of who and what we are and why we do what we do, which is not just about job creation, right? That's important, but it's not the only thing. And then we've been very critical to understand with the amount of unemployment that actually exists in our community, we could build 100 co-ops and it still wouldn't fulfill the need for employment, not the total need. So we've been very much shifting towards how do we create broad systems that improve the overall quality of life and utilize the asset that people have in our community, which is time. So we're just starting to develop a lot more systems where, you know, nobody works like 40 hours a week. Some people just work 20 hours a week, but they work that same job with 3 other people, right? But we're doing it in such a way, can people get their food needs met? Can they get their housing needs met? Can they get their child care needs met? Can they get their health care needs met? We're not fully there yet, but we're working more in that vein. And I think that gives a deeper picture of what Cooperation Jackson kind of is and what we're trying to become and why.
Vale, doncs estava mostrant aquests dipòsits d'aigua perquè, bé, vol explicar que una cosa molt important és que estan passant per una crisi de sequera, de sequera no, una crisi amb l'aigua molt gran. Aquesta crisi és donada doncs, perquè l'aigua arriba molt contaminada. Ell no recomana que ningú, quan arribés a Jackson, que ningú vegi l'aigua, que si tenen ferides obertes que no s'hi banyin, perquè realment està contaminada. El motiu per a aquesta aigua contaminada és el racisme sistèmic, ja que el govern no aporta recursos per a solucionar aquest problema i porten molt de temps amb una aigua que els ha portat a tenir que subsistir amb ampolles d'aigua de plàstic, creant un altre problema. Llavors, el que volen fer és aquests tancs per agafar aigua de la pluja, ja que allà plou molt. Llavors poden aprofitar-ho. Han tingut molts problemes per part de l'Estat, no els han facilitat gens les coses, i porten molt demanant aquests tancs que arribin. Just fa 2 setmanes que han arribat, fa 3 mesos que els han demanat. Tot això ho fan ells per la seva banda de Cooperation Jackson. Ho han comprat des de Cooperation Jackson, no hi ha una ajuda de l'Estat. De fet, a l'Estat no li interessa que trenquin la dependència amb aquest i pretenen que continuïn amb l'aigua contaminada, ja que no hi ha una aportació de solucions. I bé, llavors també el que vol mostrar amb el tema de l'aigua és que Cooperation Jackson no és només un projecte per a proporcionar treball a la gent, sinó que es refereix també a cobrir les necessitats que no estan cobertes ara mateix, no? Com per exemple l'aigua, i també doncs, parla de moltes altres coses, com qüestions de salut, la cura doncs, de nens de la infància. Bé, doncs hi ha diverses necessitats que Cooperation Jackson vol fer doncs, és cobrir, perquè encara que es centressin en proporcionar treballs, encara que hi haguessin 100 cooperatives, encara amb aquesta quantitat no podrien donar solució al problema de l'atur. Llavors, doncs, paral·lelament volen donar solució a les necessitats que no estan cobertes.
Hola, ens estem fent com una idea, no? Així generar una fotografia del que és Jackson i del que és Cooperation Jackson, de quin és el context socioeconòmic, no? que es viu, i també les condicions materials que tenen les persones que viuen a Jackson, i intentarem fer algunes preguntes una mica més concretes del que vas explicant que ens puguin servir a nosaltres per aprendre del vostre projecte. Has anomenat el pla Jackson Cash, no? Com una eina estratègica. Et volíem demanar si ens podries situar una mica d'on surt aquest pla, o sigui, què estava passant en aquell moment històricament a Jackson perquè es plantegi aquest pla i qui el va impulsar.
Yeah, so the Jackson Cush plan. It grows out of a movement, a radical movement, somewhat similar to what you all have recently, I wouldn't say recently, but there's been, there was the campaign for independence here in Catalonia. And so a segment of the Black liberation movement has also been fighting for independence. And it's called the New African Independence Movement. And Cooperation Jackson is a child of that movement. And so if you go, so any of those kind of pictures are no, go back. That's all water. So you see that house there. That house, it's right around the corner from that house. That house, yes. Right around the corner from that house, there's a street called Lewis Street. This is Central Street. There's a street called Lewis Street. And on Lewis Street, on August 21st, 1971, the Republic of New Africa established a headquarters in this neighborhood, but around the corner from that house. And on August 21st, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, and the Jackson Police Department surrounded that house, and they tried to kill everyone in the house. And they got into a shootout that lasted 2 days. And unfortunately, 2 police officers were killed and 1 FBI officer was killed. No one in the house was killed, but they blamed everyone in the house for the death of those police officers. So I'm telling you this story so you understand the context of the nature of the struggle that happened. And this was a period, basically the late 1960s, early 1970s, was really kind of the height of the Black liberation movement. You know, most people know like the Black Panther Party, where there were hundreds of organizations. It was probably just the most popular, but it was one amongst many. And this was a period when the Richard Nixon, when he came into office, he was a Republican, basically authoritarian figure, and he was determined on smashing this movement. And so this was an era of trying to smash the movement. So we are grandchildren. Literally, I'm a grandchild of some of the people who was there at the day, you know, from that shooting and all that. So there's a continuity. And what the Jackson Cush plan is something that we developed after September 11th, right? Because the context shifted for us. And we had to change like a lot of aspects of our politics, at least our political rhetoric. Because our organization, the New African People's Organization, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, we have a number of political prisoners still to this day, people who've been in prison basically since the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And many of them were designated or called terrorists by the United States government. And so when September 11th hit, we knew what the, having experience, what the United States government was going to say and what it was going to do and who it was going to attack. So that also caused us to kind of switch some of our strategy. Part of what we did after that was we didn't stop being a national organization. Like, we still had chapters throughout the United States, but we started to concentrate again on really developing chapters in the South, right? So the strategy was articulated to help build a concentrated power in the South, particularly after Hurricane Katrina. Like, that was another major shift for us, where we recognized that we had to like really concentrate and focus our effort. And so that led us into becoming and adopting a municipalist strategy of kind of attaining a level of governing power, right? Not state power, because we don't have state power. We have the ability to govern a little municipality, which means we won a popularity contest that allowed us to make certain decisions about how things go in our municipality for a certain number of years, right? So the strategy was articulated around that. And the strategy has what we kind of call an inside and outside dimension to it. So the inside dimension of it was we would run people for municipal office under independent political parties, not the Democratic Party and not the Republican Party, but independent political parties, and that we would build instruments to alter the economy. That's what Cooperation Jackson is. And that both of these would be somewhat governed by a popular people's assembly, right? That was drawn from people directly in the community practicing direct democracy, who would then direct us and any other instrument that got created to serve this plan. It would make collective decisions about how this plan would be executed in those fields. Now, it hasn't exactly worked out that way, but that was the theory. The reality has been a little bit more challenging. I'll stop there for.
Bé, ens estava ensenyant una casa que és on va néixer, a veure, on es localitzaria el lloc on es va fundar el grup República Nova Àfrica. Sí. I això va ser el 21 d'agost del 1971. Explicava el context dels 60, dels 70. Eren uns anys en els que serien, doncs, en els que hi havia més lluita del moviment del poder negre. I bé, doncs va passar alguna cosa, que és que van matar, doncs, no se sap qui, 2 policies i algú de l'FBI, i van culpar-ho, doncs, a la gent que estava, doncs, en aquesta casa, que tenia on estava la casa del moviment de la República de Nova Àfrica. Explica també, doncs, que és l'època, no?, en què està Richard Nixon, un president molt autoritari, que volia, doncs, intentar de desfer el moviment, aquest moviment de poder negre. Explica com la seva generació és, doncs, la dels nets dels nets que estaven lluitant en els 60 en aquest moviment que estava potser en el més alt que ha estat mai. i van voler donar continuïtat a aquesta lluita, i aquí és que va sortir doncs, el Jackson Push Plan, com seria un moviment, el moviment Jackson, no, el pla d'empenta Jackson. Explica doncs, bueno, que els 60, 70, 80, no, en aquesta lluita que explicava, doncs, va portar molta repressió. Hi ha gent que va ser acusada de terrorista, que encara avui dia es troba a la presó. I bé, tot i aquesta repressió no van parar, potser el que es va parar va ser doncs, aquest apropament com un moviment més nacional, i es van concentrar doncs, en desenvolupar capítols, especialment al sud, doncs, per articular un poder més municipal. Explica que sobretot després de l'huracà Katrina va haver-hi doncs, moltes coses a fer, i des d'allà, amb una estratègia municipalista, és que van començar doncs, a organitzar-se més. Parla doncs, de que bé, és una estratègia municipalista i això, i municipal, no? En el sentit de que no està lligada doncs, amb un poder d'estat. El que va passar senzillament és que els plans que van portar a la població doncs, van guanyar una gran popularitat, i la gent doncs, va animar-se a portar-los endavant. Sobretot això, no? En aquest context doncs, del Katrina, d'un moment doncs, de molta crisi, en el que, això ho dic jo, no ho dic, però en el que l'Estat no va actuar. Bé, bàsicament, una vegada ja està el projecte municipal doncs, posat a lloc, i en el que després de guanyar popularitat es porta a terme, diguem que es fa a partir d'un partit que no és ni els dos partits que existeixen als Estats Units, que és el Partit Demòcrata i el Partit Republicà. Llavors fan un partit independent, a partir d'allà tenen accés al poder municipal, i dintre d'aquest poder municipal el que fan és fer servir instruments. Aquests instruments es refereix, per exemple, a les assemblees populars. Llavors es coordinen amb aquestes assemblees populars perquè decideixin com es creen aquests plans a nivell local.
Elected officials within, bourgeois society, bourgeois governance, your job is to try to manage the contradictions of capitalism. But the contradictions of capitalism cannot be managed, right? So that was the sense, that the contradictions of capitalism cannot be managed. So what is our role, right, as leftists who are trying to enter into municipal government or any form of government? We said our particular role is not to try to manage the system, but to heighten the contradictions of the system. And so you're not there to try to fix a bunch of things, but to open up space for the social movement to have more space to intervene and act upon its own behalf to address and solve the problems through people's direct agitation, agency, and action. That part has not been agreed to, right, in practice. So once many people got in office that we helped put in office, they immediately tried to start managing the system, which meant they start making a bunch of compromises with folks who don't share any of our politics or any of our positionality. And it's not, don't want people to get confused, it's not that you don't make compromises, right? It's the nature of how do you approach governance. And so the other phrase that we had, that particularly if and when a movement such as ours can capture the executive power, which is different here than it is in the United States. So in the United States, the executive power on any level of government is the dominant form of power, right? With how the system and how the Constitution has been constructed. So us understanding that, say, okay, if you're going to be an executive power, your job is to make every decision a mass decision. That means you have to educate, use your position as the mayor, right? Your job is to go before the people to explain in detail who is pushing this particular piece of agenda, why they are pushing this particular agenda, what it would take to move this particular item, and what would be, at least in your opinion, the social cost or benefits of it. And then set up different ways in which you would do popular referendum on each major decision about, is this what the community wants or is it not what it wants? So it was a way, supposed to be a way of governing which takes the direct question and the direct power out of an individual's hands and make it a communal and collective question. What the ultimate objective is to eliminate that executive power and to create more direct forms and means of governance. What happens, and we've seen this in Jackson and a couple other places, people get in office and they like the executive power, right? So they don't educate, they don't explain, right? They then try to just govern at best in the interests of the people as they understand it and they interpret it. But it winds up meaning you get to make basically individual decisions on behalf of 200,000 people. And the only way that those 200,000 people could then really hold you accountable is either through direct protests or to vote you out of office, you know, the next 4 years, whatever the situation is. That is not what we intended. That's not what I know what I intended. And if I would have had any notion that my comrades were going to go in that direction, I would have not put time and energy into putting them in office.
Bé, explicava el problema doncs, que hi ha hagut al posar a la pràctica aquestes idees doncs, de que hi hagués algú, diguem, a l'Ajuntament. Bueno, it's a city council, right? We're talking about kind of...
It's the mayor in the
mayor,
city council.
yeah.
City council.
Bé, sí, doncs bàsicament estem parlant doncs, que al final algú queda escollit com a alcalde i com s'ha portat a la pràctica doncs, bé, no li ha agradat. Al principi la idea doncs, era que un grup activista portava tot això. Llavors doncs, bueno, van escollir algunes persones perquè fessin, no, que aquestes idees que tenia el grup activista doncs, les portessin a terme doncs, de la manera que podien a nivell municipal. El que passa és que, bé, com ha dit en una frase, els oficials escollits d'aquests governs burgesos intentaven de... Bé, sí, intentaven de manejar doncs, les contradiccions del capitalisme, però aquestes no poden ser manejades o tractades, fer alguna cosa amb elles, bàsicament. Llavors, quin seria, no, el nostre rol com a persones d'esquerra? El nostre rol particular seria doncs, fer encara més acusades aquestes contradiccions amb el sistema. Deixar un espai obert perquè el moviment social, perquè la gent pugui canviar les coses a partir de l'agitació. Aquesta hauria estat doncs, la idea original, no? Però les coses no van anar així. Una vegada les persones eren escollides i anaven doncs, bueno, a l'oficina, és una americanització, però seria doncs, anar a oficina, seria doncs, anar a l'Ajuntament o anar doncs, a un despatx. Quan volien doncs, fer coses, intentar de fer alguna cosa amb el sistema que ja estava establert, sempre feien doncs, acords amb persones amb les que no compartien cap tipus doncs, de coses en comú amb la idea, no, que hi havia enrere al principi. Poder executiu doncs, bueno, no, es refereix perquè al final clar, la idea era doncs, que hi haurien unes assemblees que serien d'alguna manera un poder executiu en el sentit doncs, de no, planejar com es farien les coses i tal. I llavors s'han hagut de conformar amb referèndums, referèndums que seria que porten la pregunta, la gent expressa la seva opinió, però no és el mateix que la gent des de les assemblees tinguessin un poder massiu de decisió. Llavors, l'objectiu últim que ara mateix tindrien seria eliminar aquest tipus de poder executiu que hi ha ara mateix, en el que hi ha només poques persones que al final poden canviar les coses. La seva idea original seria que la gent a les assemblees poguessin tenir aquest poder executiu de canviar tot plegat. I bé, al principi mai els hagués agradat que això hagués acabat així i que el poder executiu s'hagués quedat en mans d'uns pocs.
But the last thing is, even though we've struggled with this strategy, I'm still an advocate of it, and I still think it's a broad way in which our communities are going to have to build collective power to be able to transform the system and be able to then democratically federate across international boundaries and borders. So, just imagine if we could, Jackson could federate with Rojava, could federate with Chiapas, could federate with Catalonia, right? What a different type of world that we could have. So I'm still an advocate of it, but what we've learned, and now 10 years of trying to execute this strategy, is that it's harder to construct unity sometimes than you think. And the levels of real dialogue and real consensus building that you have to do to really get on the same page, to not underestimate that. That's really important.
Bé, diu que tot i els problemes que estan havent ara mateix, l'ho mencionat abans, encara li agradaria continuar endavant. Encara li agrada que això existeixi, en contra que no existís. Falta molt camí per recórrer, però li agradaria pensar que hi hagués una possibilitat de confederació amb altres territoris que estan intentant de lluitar per ideals similars, com és a Chiapas, com és a Rojava. Seria bé executar una estratègia que pogués construir més unitat, però és molt difícil. I volia dir ell, en aquesta última frase, que hem de ser conscients del temps i l'energia que pren intentar de portar a terme els consensos i bé, senzillament que s'ha de tenir tot això en compte.
Doncs, com que tenim poc temps i està molt bé que pugueu tenir un torn de debat des del públic, faré dues preguntes més, una més encarada com aprofundint una mica o més amb el plan polític que ens està comentant que hi ha possibilitat el sorgiment de Cooperation Jackson, i l'altra potser més de projecte, més en concret de la part més comunitària, i després donaríem pas. Estirant una mica el fil del que està comentant ara de tot aquest context i moviment polític, sí que nosaltres tenim a casa com moviments recents més o menys massius de defensa dels drets humans, com pot ser tot el moviment que es va generar al voltant de la independència del referèndum, o bé xarxes d'autoorganització més o menys espontànies i potents davant d'unes necessitats com van ser davant del Covid. Sí que veiem que en un context de capitalisme avançat, amb un individualisme extrem, hi ha molta fragmentació i a nivell identitari és molt difícil generar un sentiment de pertanyença de classe. A més, això s'ha venut l'estat del benestar, en el que hi ha una classe mitja que el pot comprar i això desmobilitza molt. Llavors, afegim també les diferents onades migratòries dels anys 70 que hem tingut a casa nostra, que continuen estant segregades, i Doncs ens agradaria saber com o quins elements han facilitat aquest sentiment de pertanyença de classe. El context és molt diferent, ho sabem, però potser podem trobar algun paral·lelisme i aquesta unió o xarxa als Estats Units i en concret a Jackson.
So, in the United States, we have a very particular beast, which is sometimes very confusing. And that's the beast of race and racism and white supremacy. And in Mississippi, which before the Civil War was the richest state in the United States. Now it's typically the poorest state in the United States for the same reason, right? So what made Mississippi so rich was the ruthless exploitation of black labor, right? That was enslaved for roughly 20 years. So that super exploitation brought a very small number of white planters a tremendous amount of wealth. And then they didn't necessarily distribute that wealth amongst the white community, but they created layers of access to wealth and to status, right? And they created systems where that was based in large part upon ethnicity. So in the main part of the northern part of Mississippi, most of the landowners, the big landowners, were English and descendants of the English very specifically. Most of the overseers, the people who worked to manage, right, the African enslaved community were Scotch or Scotch-Irish, right? And what's important about this is that these were people who were colonized earlier by the English. So they were already at a lower role in a lower position within the English, setup. And so, but when they came to the United States, they then created a system which told them, you're no longer Scotch-Irish, you're white. So me and you, even though I'm rich and you're not exactly rich, you're better than these black people and you're better than these indigenous people, right? And you are not supposed to have any solidarity with these black people or you'll get treated just like them, right? So that if you don't want to be treated like a slave, you stay away from associating with people. That level of both ethnic and racial division still exists, very much so in the United States. And what it does is it overlays with class. So there's sometimes which in the United States, race is class. And there's sometimes in the United States where race is not class. And you have to be able to distinguish between the two to kind of know, because it's not the same in every community, right? So if you just go a couple of hours south to New Orleans, which is only about 180 miles south of Jackson. So in New Orleans, that was originally colonized by the French. And then there was a period of about 50 years in which it was a colony of Spain, right? Spain held it for 50 years. And both of them practiced a different type of racial construction. So in the French and Spanish, they both made gradations based upon how much European ancestry you appeared to have. So if you were lighter skinned, you were treated better, you were given more educational access, you were given more access to, the master's culture, or whatever the situation is. And that remnant still exists. So, in not as bad as it used to be, but it's still there. So if you go to like New Orleans, most politicians are lighter than I am, but they're still black. And most of them still have French names, right? Because that is part of the legacy of what's being passed on. And in the New Orleans context, often those who are lighter skinned and who have a French name or a French ancestry, by way of their name, they are a little bit richer and better educated traditionally, and those are things that are passed on. So in that case, you have to know very clearly the class dynamic that exists within the black community, because it becomes very important. So there's just different types of ceilings that exist, even amongst black communities, but it is not just black communities. You find this in the Native American communities, you find it in Latino communities, where there's just different ways in which race and access to wealth, they correspond, and that creates its own kind of class dynamics. Now, Jackson, it's easy, much easier in Jackson to get people to understand that they are part of the working class, because we have a high degree of both racial unity, right, racial uniformity, I should say, and class uniformity. Everybody's poor, right? Most everybody's poor. So, and they know that they're poor. There's no illusions that I'm richer than I am, right? And so, and then what makes it also easier in Mississippi is the racism is so blatant. So everything that you all witnessed and heard Trump saying for the 4 years that he was in office, imagine hearing that for 100 years without any interruption. That was Mississippi. That is Mississippi. So when Trump became president, we had a joke. And our joke was to everybody who didn't live in Mississippi, welcome to Mississippi. We all live in Mississippi now, right? And so like you get a taste of what the racism is and how people act, that for at least about a 50-year period was not the national norm, but it's becoming more of the norm again now. So, but on the class question, it's the nature of the white oppression, it's the nature of the poverty that already instills a lot of class consciousness amongst the people that we work with and that are our members base. What we struggle with is not necessarily getting people to understand, say like they are part of the working class. What we struggle with is getting people to believe that things can change. So they know that they're oppressed, but there's very little belief that anything is going to change. That is our greatest struggle, not the struggle of convincing people that something's wrong. So can I just say, so that in short to answer, what I would answer is, it's knowing your history, knowing your context, and knowing your people and culture. Like those are the things that you really have to know to then figure out, how do I talk to people about how do we identify, how do we unite, and how do we relate to each other? And then what do we want to do together?
Vale, intentaré de resumir una miqueta, però bueno, estava explicant una miqueta doncs, la història doncs, de Mississippi en comparació, no, amb la pregunta i el context d'aquí. Vale, doncs, ha estat explicant com històricament, no, doncs, Mississippi en concret tenia, com ha explicat, és molt agricultural, llavors doncs, en el període d'esclavitud doncs, hi havia uns quants planters que eren blancs i llavors doncs, una gran explotació esclavitzada negra o racialitzada. Bé, llavors, què passava? Que hi havia com una estratus, no? Capes. No, una estratificació que té a veure doncs, amb el color de la pell, amb la raça, en el que a dalt de tot estarien doncs, els propietaris de terres anglesos, i llavors, com que històricament hi havia doncs, els escocesos i els irlandesos que ja havien estat diguem, colonitzats o dominats a la seva terra, al venir a l'anar a Estats Units, es trobaven en què, bé, ara amb els anglesos tenien una relació diferent, no? Una relació millor que la que tenien quan estaven a Escòcia o a Irlanda, perquè allà els deien, bueno, tu et dono el segon millor estatus, i el teu segon millor estatus seria el de, diguem, jefe, el que està supervisant a tota la població esclavitzada que no és blanca. Llavors venien altres persones que estaven en un estatus encara inferior, que ja directament estem parlant de persones esclavitzades racialitzades. Llavors, amb tot això, el que volia dir és que la raça i la classe té una història als Estats Units que està molt lligada. I també diu que, bé, depèn molt d'on estiguis, perquè llavors explicava sobre Nova Orleans, en el que allà també hi ha una estratificació, però que igual aquesta estratificació no és tan binària com està a Jackson. Nova Orleans, per exemple, hi ha una estratificació que està feta per si tu pots ser una persona racialitzada, però si tens la pell més clara pot ser que tinguis uns privilegis a l'accés a recursos. I així com polítics que són persones racialitzades però que són potser més clars de pell i tal. Bé, tot això volia acabar-ho concloent amb el tema de que Jackson al final, comparat en llocs en els que aquesta estratificació raça-classe és més complexa, a Jackson avui dia hi ha una uniformitat racial molt gran, o sigui, la majoria de la població... Bé, perdó. No, la meitat de la població és negra, però llavors definitivament el que sí que hi ha és que la majoria de la població negra pertany a la classe treballadora. Llavors allà hi ha una qüestió molt uniforme i no hi ha il·lusions de classe mitja allà perquè no hi ha l'oportunitat de tenir aquestes il·lusions. Llavors, bé, parla que el racisme a Mississippi és descarat, que tenen un acudit que diu que tot el que estava experimentant als Estats Units el dir, ostres, però aquest tio està dient coses molt racistes, doncs l'acudit és que bé, ara viviu a Mississippi, ara sabeu el que és estar 100 anys sentint coses racistes de manera ininterrompida. I bé, finalment, intentant de contestar l'essència de la pregunta, el que explicava era que no hi ha un problema a Jackson de pertinença a la classe obrera perquè és que no hi ha lloc a donar-se il·lusions de que són classe mitja, perquè és que realment hi ha molta pobresa. El problema és que la gent... O sigui, el que li agradaria més aviat és que la gent, a part de saber que són oprimides, que ja ho sàpiguen, que ja ho saben, el que li agradaria és que la gent sapigués que les coses poden canviar. Això és el que els agradaria transmetre i llavors recomana que per no caure en el parany de no entendre que la gent està en una classe obrera seria conèixer la història, conèixer el context, conèixer la cultura, el d'on venim, seria la millor manera d'entendre la pertinença de classe.
Ara que hem aprofundit una mica en aquesta memòria històrica per entendre d'on ve Cooperation Jackson, que és com imprescindible saber-la. Última pregunta, torno una mica a la concreció del projecte Cooperation Jackson, a la part més comunitària, més que res perquè des de les comunalitats urbanes una de les vies que estem explorant és les economies comunitàries no monetàries, no basades en l'intercanvi de diners. Anomenat que a Cooperation Jackson hi ha experiències de propietat col·lectiva que permet a la gent no estar preocupada per expropiacions o per desnonaments i poder tenir projectes més sòlids, però nosaltres hem vist que també tenen altres projectes que poden ser similars a Banc del Temps o altres que li diuen Make Up Space o Mas Obres Veïnes, que ens agradaria que comentés breument perquè potser sí que podem trobar alguna similitud per replicar.
So the name of the community land trust is the Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust. Fannie Lou Hamer was, she was from the Mississippi Delta. She, was a sharecropper, and sharecropper were black farmers and some white farmers, but mainly black farmers who were indebted to a bigger white farm that they farmed for, basically as a peon. But she became very instrumental in the organizing struggle during the civil rights struggle in Mississippi in the early 1960s. And she wound up becoming a leader of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 went to challenge the National Democratic Party. And she was one of the people who went to challenge them. And she gave a real powerful speech that you can find on YouTube. It was so powerful and so scary that the President of the United States, about 4 minutes into the speech, called for a press conference to get her off of national TV so that all the news channels would go to him. Even though he had nothing to say, he just didn't want her on TV anymore. That's how threatened that they were at that particular time by what she was saying and how it was going to divide the Democratic Party. So we named our land trust after her. And the reason we have gone with this strategy was very practical. And it took us 2 years. We were young, very young, like 21, 22, and we didn't know what we were doing at all about running a business or anything like that. But we worked hard. We were very disciplined about the work and got up every day, followed our routine. But eventually we figured out how to actually run a business and, make money to keep the business open. But we didn't own the property that we were operating in. And as soon as the landlord realized that we were making money, he increased the rent. And he started to increase the rent every 6 months, because we were making money. And we got to a point where we just, look, this doesn't make any sense. That everything that we have learned now how to do, he's basically stealing from us, from the rent. And the piece was, this was a very community, wasn't like the business that we created. We were like, we can just go to another neighborhood. No, it was very much attached with the philosophy of helping the black community. So we needed to be in the black community and amongst our people for the social mission of it to function and work. But the cheapest places for us to go were in the Latino community, a couple of miles away. And we were like, we're not Latino, that's not our community. Not that we wouldn't want to help or another form of racism, but it was like people in that community have to figure out what they want. We couldn't come from the outside and say, we're going to do this for you because we don't know you. Right? We don't know what you need, what you want, how you want to work. We knew that within our own community. So we couldn't just move. That was a point. It would kill the business. It would defeat the business. And there was nothing in that community that we could buy. So eventually we just closed the co-op. But the lesson that we learned from that is anytime we do anything else in the future, we need to own it first. We need to own the land, own the building first, so no one can come and set new terms whenever they feel like it, and then we have to meet their terms. So we started basically almost 15 years before we started another co-op. We started a savings amongst ourselves, right? And we recruited other people that people had to put in. If you wanted to be a part of this particular project, you had to give a minimum of $50 a month, right? And you just put it in. We wouldn't touch the money. We just put it in the bank and you gave $50 a month. And so we started that in 2001. And we didn't buy our first piece of property with any of that money until 2013. So 12 years later, right? And we had a good chunk of money by that time. We had like $500,000, $500,000. Now, that may not sound like a lot of money, but in Mississippi, at that time, that was a fair amount of money. And so we could we bought 2 nice pieces of property, which is our 2 foundation pieces. So it's critical for me to tell you this story and for folks to understand, because us owning this meant that we could experiment, right? And we weren't dependent upon having to meet any market demand, right? Very critical. Because all we have to do, we said as a bottom line, all we have to do is pay taxes and pay utilities. That was it. So anything else that we did, as long as we could afford that, was all an experiment, right? Any improvement we want to make, we can make it however we want to make it, etc. But there was nobody saying, hey, if you don't pay us this rent, we're going to shut the doors. Very important. That gives us, and we also have a policy. It may change in the near future, but we have a policy within Cooperation Jackson that we adopted from day one. We don't rent anything, right? We save up money to buy whatever it is that we need. And if we can't buy it, we say that we don't need it. We'll find some other way to deal with it, right? Either an older technology or just by hand, or we'll wait. But we don't rent anything. So any property that you see us, that we go to buy, I buy it because I know I have the money to buy it, right? Not because I want to. I've saved up the money from all of our activities, and then we buy it. And the purpose of why we do it is we're trying to create an insular protected economy. And this is important because the largest employer in the state of Mississippi is Walmart, right? Which is a global beast. And so we're, in effect, competing with them, right? And we know because they're global, on a certain level, we cannot compete. We just can't. There's no way to make lower food than lower prices than the prices that they're going to make. So this is where the piece around how do you create and circulate the goods and services without money. So if what we do is say, okay, if you come and work on the farm for so many hours, you get so much food per week, per month, per year. You don't have to pay for it. And we can get away with that. Why? We own the land. We own the means of production. We save our own seeds, right? We have our own, even before this, we have our own water sources in case they decide to cut the water off. So there was a strategy. Part of this Jackson Kush Plan strategy was based upon how do we create a circular economy if and when the greater forces of capitalism and the greater forces of white supremacy want to try to cut us off. And we know that they will because we experienced that in Hurricane Katrina. So it's not like speculation, it's like we have lived experience. And the important thing is around why this works in our context is because people also have a memory, a living memory of these types of oppression. So they know that, the powers that be will make these types of decisions. So there's already, from our lived experience and how we kind of educated ourselves around that experience, that there's a broad level of buy-in to what we're doing. So the time banking and all that stuff runs off of that. Where we've struggled, and then I'll stop, where we've struggled is we wanted to create and still trying to create an alternative currency, a local alternative currency that would accompany the time bank. And we made a mistake about how we did that at first that we're trying to correct now. But it's very early, and this summer in August, we're gonna be doing like some training with some folks from Kenya, actually. We're bringing them to us in Jackson because they're doing a project where they've created a local currency and they have a time bank with it that they figured out. So we're bringing them in to show us how you did what you did, so we can try to emulate that and put it into practice in the service of our community. So check with us next year to see how it's going.
Ens estava explicant al principi una miqueta sobre una figura molt inspiradora que es deia Wayne Luheimer.
Technically, it's Francis Louise.
Okay.
It's just Southern short. Francis Louise
Hamer.
Hamer. Yeah.
Francis Louise Hamer. I bé, ella era una grangera i bé, va ser tan popular en la lluita dels drets civils que una vegada parlant a televisió doncs, el president mateix la va fer fora immediatament perquè no continués parlant. Això era el 64. Donava uns discursos amb molta força. Bé, el perquè d'aquesta... Explicaré una miqueta el perquè, com arriben al punt de treballar en aquest sistema sense diners, a partir de bancs de temps i d'una altra manera que comentaré més tard. Bàsicament van tenir una experiència fa 20 anys en el que estaven intentant tenir una cooperativa i en un moment en què estaven llogant, diguem que el propietari que els estava llogant aquest local en el que estaven treballant, cada 6 mesos els anava augmentant el lloguer ja que veia que els estava anant molt bé el negoci. I després d'aquesta experiència en la que van decidir marxar-se i intentar de tenir alguna cosa de la seva propietat. Llavors, el que van fer va ser estalviar durant molt de temps perquè es donaven compte que no volien tornar a llogar mai més. De fet, tenen una filosofia a la Jackson Corporation que no volen llogar res, ni materials, res de res. Sempre han d'estalviar primer abans de llogar, que no entra en la seva filosofia o en com volen fer les coses, bàsicament. Bé, estava explicant una miqueta ell la història que en aquesta propietat que llogaven els interessava molt la pertinença a la comunitat negra de la zona, més que res perquè aquesta és la pertinença que hi havia. Bé, llavors fa 15 anys van començar a estalviar per aquest projecte i llavors ho van fer de manera que la gent aportava diners, aportaven encara que fos 50 euros al mes. Això va ser a partir del 2001. Llavors, el 2013 ja van aconseguir tenir $500,000 i bé, això a Mississippi és bastant i amb això van comprar les propietats, la terra i tot plegat. I bé, el tema de tenir la seva propietat els permetia que les úniques despeses que es tinguessin ja fossin els impostos o l'aigua o l'electricitat. I ara mateix, com que Walmart Walmart seria com una cadena tipus el Carrefour, però que és molt més extesa. Llavors hi ha tant d'atur que amb tota la feina que estan fent a Cooperation Jackson estan competint directament ja amb Walmart, perquè Walmart és el que està donant molta de la feina a la ciutat. Llavors, com funciona el tema del banc del temps? Bé, bàsicament, si tu treballes tantes hores, tens tant menjar proporcionat, entenc de la seva agricultura, i bé, així és com ara mateix està funcionant el banc del temps per crear una economia dintre de la seva pròpia cooperativa, per així dir-ho. I llavors el que estan intentant és acompanyar aquest banc del temps amb una moneda alternativa. Ara mateix estan entrenant-se amb gent de Kènia que els estan intentant d'ajudar a veure com poden trobar una solució per tenir una moneda alternativa, i que l'any que ve estigueu atentes a veure com ha anat funcionant, perquè és com que estan en una prova pilot ara mateix de com portar-ho a terme.
Obriríem torn d'aportacions, preguntes, comentaris, el que vulgueu.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I have like 2 questions. One question is, which vision you will have to try to prevent that misunderstanding to think the black person does not have ability or the same capacity to think or to do something like white person? The second question, according to the experience for Jackson, which method you will use to prevent that problems for saving or mismanagement? I tell like mismanagement because if you manage it, you don't have this challenge. Which method you will have in the future to prevent that problems? Thank you.
Could you repeat the first question just to make sure I get it right? Because I have something I just thought I said. Let me ask.
Okay. My question is, which vision you will have to try to prevent that misunderstanding for the person to think the black person does not have the same capacity or able to do something like white person? Because the example you give us is you tell us the person who rich as a black person does not think is the same the rich for white person. Which vision you will have to prevent that problems, because it takes long period for that misunderstanding. Because the white person have the same ability and the same capacity to do something like black person.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the United States, this notion that black people don't possess the same intellectual capacity as white people, that has largely been defeated a long time ago. Going back to the 19 teens and 20s, like the Harlem Renaissance, a period where there was major intellectual, artistic, cultural, like the jazz age. That's all a part of that period. So that was long disputed. The question in our context is, as a social question, right? The society itself, rooted in white supremacy in the way that it is, it's not that people question people's capacity anymore. It's still a question, however, do you have the right to exercise your humanity? Okay, that's what's being challenged still, right? So the society, because of the strength of the Black Power movement, the society has been forced to deal with, we are human, so that kind of has been settled. What's not settled is making you human doesn't mean I have to treat you equally, right? That part has not been settled in society. And that's not just for black people that they have this question, right? It's anybody who's not white, right? It's anybody who's not white. And it's real dangerous right now in the United States, in particular because you have a segment of the population, mainly white men, older white men, who feel as if they have lost their country and that the world is no longer operating by natural law. Meaning, you know, the world that they grew up in, they were on top and everybody was on bottom. And that's the way things should be. And they're very mad that they're not like that anymore. And they're doing everything in their power to make it like that again. Now, what we do still suffer from, though, I would say in the black community, how would you put it? White people still live in our heads too much. And our notions of beauty, some of our notions of self-worth are still very much tied to European notions and standards of beauty, etc. That's still real. And that's going to take some time, I think, to undo, right? We didn't start that way, you know, and it took a couple of 100 years of slavery and colonialism to get us to kind of believe this madness. And it's going to take some work to undo it. But the intelligence piece, like in my own community, I don't have to convince anybody that you are smart, or that part I think has been done. What people really question is, you know, how are we going to remove these people from power so that they have control over all the resources, right? Because we have now also, I consider one of my people, myself and but particularly my little brother, one of these people who is deeply frustrated by how much just mental capacity he has, but how little opportunity he has to exercise what he knows how to do, right? So my brother, for instance, he's a physicist, but hardly anybody will hire him to be a physicist. So he has not had much opportunity to actually do what he loves and what he really knows how to do and what he's really great at doing, right? And it's very hard to be like, well, I'm gonna go start my own, you know, I'm gonna go start my own astronomy institution, right? Because you have to have money.
I bé, parla llavors doncs, de tota aquesta població que està perdent estatus, sobretot doncs, els homes grans i blancs, doncs, que estan com molt enfadats, no? Amb el que pensen que és una espècie de llei natural, no? Que és doncs, que ells haurien d'estar al capdamunt de l'estatus i pensen que ploren de pensar que estan perdent el seu país o que el món ja no és com hauria de ser, etc. Bé, bàsicament doncs, això, actuar de manera racista. I una de les coses que menciona és que les persones de la seva comunitat, les persones negres, una cosa que pateixen és tenir a la gent blanca massa al seu cap, sobretot doncs, tot el que són els cànons estètics europeus i bé, molts altres cànons europeus de com s'han de fer les coses que existeixen als caps de la gent i resideixen allà per massa temps. I diu que prendrà, doncs, si han sigut 200 anys no, de pensar les coses d'aquesta manera per al colonialisme, doncs prendrà molt més temps, doncs, molt més temps no, però que prendrà molt de temps doncs, de poder desfer tota aquesta influència. A la seva comunitat, en concret, doncs, a la Jackson Corporation no hi ha en cap moment un prejudici doncs, de que les persones negres o les persones racialitzades siguin menys capaces o menys hàbils doncs, de fer qualsevol tipus de tasca. Això no és una qüestió. Llavors, la qüestió és com treure a la gent el poder que tingui aquest tipus de pensament o que alimenti aquest tipus d'estructures de poder que facin que no tothom tingui les mateixes oportunitats, com és el cas del seu germà, que bé, és un físic, és interessat en l'astronomia i que té una gran capacitat intel·lectual per desenvolupar-se, però llavors es troba que no està trobant oportunitats a nivell laboral. Pensa, igual m'agradaria fundar la meva pròpia institució astronòmica, però hi ha la frustració que per fundar qualsevol cosa necessites diners i bé, doncs és una pena que hi hagin bloquejos a l'hora de realitzar per al que creus que t'han posat a la terra, per al que has nascut per fer. I bé, ara ja està.
I am Eric from Ghana. Mr. Jackson, from what you have lectured us up to now, I could see that the blacks in diaspora, most especially in the US, they've been suffering a lot in the hands of the either men or major whites. You've been in slaves for so many years now. Your ancestors have been in slavery, and up to now, you, the children born and unborn ones who are still in the slavery. I hope you have learned that you were imported to US from Africa, mostly. What have been your major objectives that you are still living in Mississippi or in the US without returning, finding the coast route from where you were being taken? Like we are saying, your brother is a physician. In Africa, for instance, we need those intellectuals to educate our people. In order for us to be in our liberty, why not you people in Africa go and in US find the root cause of your ancestors and go back there and help them? Secondly, I want Jackson to understand that in Africa, all the natural resources, we have it. We are feeding, if not the western part of Africa, of this world, in Europe, for instance, a lot have been taken from Africa every there and then. Why not you people organize yourself and meet the various African governments and sit down with them, or some individuals who are having an ideas of bringing out some productions that can help the African community so that we may not force ourselves in diaspora as we are. Because we've been here, if we don't take care, our children are going to be enslaved as we are now. So this is my question. How are we going to bridge ourselves from this calamity that have been falling on our ancestors up to date? Thank you.
Yeah, tricky question. Tricky question. So the movement I come from is very much centered on, as we say, returning to the source. You know, borrowing from Amilcar Cabral, right? And for those of you who don't know who Amilcar Cabral was, he was the leader of the Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verdean Islands. So that's where we get the phrase return to the source from. So, you know, my parents did everything that they could to make sure that we knew about, you know, the African cultures that we come from, and then just Africa in general. And what makes this question tricky is at least the section of the movement I come from, we were very clear about how badly the experiments in Sierra Leone and Liberia went, right? And in both of those cases, but particularly in Liberia, you had the folks who were part of the African diaspora who were brought back primarily by the United States government. They started calling themselves American Liberians. That's a problem. And they started to view themselves better than the folks who never left the continent. And if we are not careful, that same dynamic will continue to play itself out from Americans, from Africans who were born in America, who then try to return to the continent. I've been to Ghana several times. I went to the University of Legon, you know, for a year, and I saw it with some of the students that I grew up with, who were my friends, right? Some of them still my friends. A particular way in which they wanted to bring the resource privilege that comes with having an American passport and comes with having American dollars. They wanted to then go to Ghana and move and live in Ghana, but live like white folks live in the United States, but only do it in Ghana, right? And I have friends who are there now who are doing this. I know them. I still talk to them. I still love them. And I criticize the shit out of them every time I talk to them about, you know, you sitting there trying to live like an Obruni, right? Like, why? What's going on here? You were raised better than that. That's our joke. Like your mama taught you better than that. So there's a mental piece that still has to happen, is my thing. And to me, there, you know, I remember I was in a meeting, this was like 20 years ago, oh, maybe longer now. This is 95. So J.J. Rollins was still the president, and he had a meeting, was like the Congressional Black Caucus, and they allowed students, I was a college student, and they allowed some students to go to the meeting. And I left the meeting because part of what he seemed to be offering was come here and live lavishly. And I was like, you may not know these people. I know these people. I grew up with them. That's the wrong message to be given to them. Like they're the worst aspects of our culture are going to come there. And so I've seen some of that with my own eyes. So return to the source doesn't mean like just come to me, at least. This is my position. It does not mean come and try to live like some European, you know, in the continent. It means come at the invitation of the people who are there and work to find solutions with the people who are there. And that part still isn't really happening from what I see. That's just me. I'm not there as much as I used to be. But the folks who I'm in contact with, there's some folks, a small minority of people who are like in my age generation now, I'm 50 years old, who are, consciously going back, leaving the United States. Some have planned to do this for a long time. Others are just saying, I'm tired of this country, I see the way it's going, let me go. Now, I support that, but I support it with conditions, right? Just as a student of history, that there needs to be direction on the other end that kind of says, welcome, this is what we want you to do, this is how we want you to do it, these are the terms and conditions of being here. And I don't see that yet. I think it's very much like just come, bring your money, and kind of do what you want to do. And I think if there's no direction around, no, in 10 years we're going to develop this, in 20 years we're going to develop this. So for me, I think I have a lot of skills, I have a lot to offer, right? And in Jackson, I know what 10 years is going to, if in my own head and in our own community, our own conversation, we have a vision. This is what 10 years is going to look like. This is what 20 years is going to look like. There's no guarantee that we'll get there, but at least we know, right? And for me, I haven't been exposed to that when I've gone to the continent. And I'm very weary of a lot of the government folks that I've met. I used to work in an office around the UN, right? And so I meet with a lot of African dignitaries. And brother, I did not like most of the people who I encountered. I was like, if you are running the show, I'm very scared as to what the next 10 to 20 years is going to look like. Because I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but this is a personal question. But my father, he was gifted with languages in a way that I'm not. So he spoke 7 or 8 different languages. Now that's common in the continent. That's not common in the United States. But one of the things he was able to do as a result of his role in our organization was he was like a diplomat, and he would translate a lot of stuff, right, and be able to move and do stuff. And so, I was introduced to, as a young kid, revolutionary leadership from Angola, from Mozambique, from, the exiles from South Africa. And I saw a quality of leadership then, this was in the 70s and 80s, I don't see now, right? I saw and grew up with a vision of, we're going to make our country free, independent. I don't see that now. There's, this one trying to get this IMF loan, and this one, the World Bank, and, it's like, well, where's the independence of thought? Where's the independence of action? So I just don't see that many, Cabrals or Sankaras on the scene now. I know that they exist, but they're not in power now. So I think there's a piece that, the thing that makes me the most frustrated is that we are in a period now where there's more ability to communicate with each other instantaneously than ever, and we're communicating, across the diaspora and across the continent, we're communicating with each other less than we were 30 or 40 years ago. And that's something we have to correct. There's a way out. Yeah, no, we have to fight, brother. There's a way out. Look, this is what my grandmother told me. So my father's mother, she had 17 children. She had 17 children that were born. Okay, she probably was pregnant more than that, but that were born. Only 4 of them lived to adulthood. Only 4. So that means 13 of them basically either died or were kidnapped. We know 2 of them were kidnapped and taken to Mexico. We know that for a fact. But she would always remind me, and this is what I constantly remind myself when I have doubts, right? There's nothing that I will ever go through which was worse than the slave ships my ancestors went through. And if they could make that, right, I can make anything. So I walk with that. I try to take that negative experience and turn it into a positive. That we are strong, we can overcome all of this. This is a temporary blip in our history. That's it.
Ell li preguntava bàsicament que per què doncs, la diàspora seria com les persones que són d'origen, són persones negres que estan visquent als Estats Units, que originàriament els seus ancestres són africans. Llavors, clar, la pregunta venia lligada a això, el dir, doncs llavors, per què no van aquestes persones que tenen tantes ganes de realitzar projectes, perquè no van a l'Àfrica, doncs bueno, com a intentar de realitzar projectes que serien potser més fàcils de... No, perdó. Com seria doncs això, que anessin les persones negres, africanes, negres americanes a anar a l'Àfrica a realitzar projectes allà. Bé, bàsicament la resposta és que és una qüestió molt complicada. Una de les qüestions que menciona és el fet que cada vegada que van persones americanes a Àfrica hi ha una diferència, s'emporten amb elles una diferència per al que són els dòlars que porten amb ells. La diferència, diferències culturals que se les emporten allà on van. Llavors això fa que també hi hagin situacions en les que potser puguin ser tractades amb massa diferència i que ells mateixos, les persones que van dels Estats Units a Àfrica, que vulguin viure una vida similar a la dels Estats Units. Llavors això és un problema a l'hora de fer cap tipus de col·laboració. Llavors un dels altres problemes que veu és que, perquè ell coneix a persones que han anat allà, que s'han anat a viure, per exemple, a Ghana, i el que passa és que no veuen que tinguin un pla clar de què volen fer. Igual, per exemple, Cooperative Jackson diu, mira, d'aquí 10 anys volem fer això, però llavors el que veus és que gent va allà, potser s'acomoda amb un estil de vida similar al que podrien tenir als Estats Units a nivell així de com viuen, però llavors no hi ha potser el dir en 10 anys volem fer això, en 20 anys l'altre.